बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम और अस्सलाम वालेकुम। मैं हूं वजाहत सईद खान। पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ बहुत सारे महाज खोले, कुछ हमने खुद खोले और काफी सारे हमारे खिलाफ खोले गए। आज का महाज अमेरिका के नाम। दो अमेरिका हैं। एक अमेरिका ने जो पाकिस्तान में होता आ रहा है पिछले 2-2.5 साल से, एक अमेरिका ने मतलब जो अमेरिकी हुकूमत है उसने नजरअंदाज किया है। They've turned the other way। और जो भी हुआ है पाकिस्तान में इमरान के साथ, इमरान खान के साथियों के साथ, आम पाकिस्तानियों के साथ, पाकिस्तानी जर्नलिस्ट के साथ, पाकिस्तानी जमहूरियत के साथ, अमेरिका ने दूसरी तरफ किया है, इग्नोर किया है फॉर जियोपॉलिटिकल रीजंस, क्योंकि अमेरिका का बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट पार्टनर है फौज। और ये चीज हम समझ सकते हैं क्योंकि अमेरिका ने ये पहले भी किया हुआ है और दीगर और ममालिक के साथ रोज ये करता है। मगर दूसरी तरफ अमेरिकी पार्लियामेंट, अमेरिकी लेजिस्लेचर मतलब अमेरिकी कांग्रेस ने कुछ और किया है। 2 दिन पहले हमने ये खबर ब्रेक की थी कि हाउस कि कांग्रेस के हाउस में रेजोल्यूशन नंबर 901 पास हुई है, थंपिंग मेजॉरिटी से पास हुई है। 85% अमेरिकी कांग्रेसमैन ने वोट किया है कि पाकिस्तान में नए जो इलेक्शंस हुए हैं वो एक्चुअली उन पे इन्वेस्टिगेशन हो और मजम्मत की है जो पाकिस्तानियों के साथ ज्यादती हो रही है। आपकी स्क्रीन की राइट हैंड साइड पे इस वक्त आप रो खन्ना को देख सकते हैं। ये डेमोक्रेट हैं, इंडियन ओरिजिन के अमेरिकी निजात इंडियन निजात अमेरिकी कांग्रेसमैन है, कैलिफोर्निया से ताल्लुक रखते हैं। इन्होंने तो इसे ब्रेक किया है अपने टिकटॉक चैनल पे। क्यों धूम मचाई हुई है, लेट्स लिसन इन कि ये क्या कहते हैं इस रेजोल्यूशन के बारे में और फिर कंसंट्रेट करते हैं कि इस रेजोल्यूशन का इंपैक्ट क्या है पाकिस्तानी फौज पे, पाकिस्तानी हुकूमत पे और ऑफ कोर्स अमेरिका के अंदर जो अब दरार पड़ गई है अमेरिकी गवर्नमेंट और अमेरिकी लेजिस्लेचर के दरमियान, उसका आपके लिए, इमरान के लिए, मेरे लिए उस पे क्या इम्पैक्ट होगा। बट फर्स्ट लेट्स लिसन टू रोखन्ना।
Great news. Congress just called for a full investigation into the elections in Pakistan with an overwhelming 368-7 vote. We also condemned the harassment and confinement of those activists in Pakistan, including Imran Khan. We need to call out the current regime in Pakistan and support democracy.
अब ये पहले नहीं हो रहा था, दिस वाज नॉट हैपनिंग। ये क्यों हो रहा है? ये इसलिए हो रहा है, ये 6 महीने पहले नहीं हो रहा था, साल पहले नहीं हो रहा था। ये इसलिए हो रहा है कि एक मुहिम चली है, 2-2.5 साल से आहिस्ता आहिस्ता चली है। पाकिस्तानी डायस्पोरा ने ऑर्गेनाइज किया है और उसके साथ साथ पाकिस्तानी डायस्पोरा की मदद कुछ लोगों ने की है। अब ये लास्ट मिनट जो फिनागलिंग हुई है, इसकी ऑलरेडी हमने आपको कहानी सुनाई है कि ये रिकॉर्डेड वोट नहीं होना था, ये वॉइस वोट होना था, मगर रिकॉर्डेड हुआ। ईमेल्स गई, दर्जनों सैकड़ों ईमेल्स गई पाकिस्तानी एक्टिविस्ट के जरिए, उनके दोस्तों के जरिए, और फिर ये रेजोल्यूशन पास हुआ। इसकी बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग बैक स्टोरी है, मगर इस बैक स्टोरी में एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट किरदार है और वो किरदार आज मेरे साथ हैं और उनका नाम एरिक स्पर्लिंग है। एरिक स्पर्लिंग जो है वो एग्जीक्यूटिव डायरेक्टर हैं जस्ट फॉरेन पॉलिसी के। इन्होंने ये स्टोरी ब्रेक की थी। आज मैं एरिक से 3 सवाल पूछूंगा। एक तो ये कैसे हुआ, दूसरा इस पे अब पाकिस्तानी जो मिलिट्री है उस पे उसका क्या इंपैक्ट होगा, उस पे क्या इंपैक्ट होगा। कुछ लोग कह रहे हैं सैंक्शंस लगेंगी आसिम मुनीर पे, कुछ लोग कह रहे हैं पूरी फौज पे सैंक्शंस लग सकती हैं। ऑलरेडी एक रेजोल्यूशन जो है वो टेबल हुआ है कि इनकी इमदाद बंद करो, वो पिछले हफ्ते 10 दिन पहले हुआ था, वो भी हमने आपके लिए स्टोरी ब्रेक की थी। तो अमेरिका की तरफ से जो आप कह सकते हैं जो अब जो पेच जो टाइट हो रहे हैं उसको एक्सप्लेन करेंगे एरिक। पाकिस्तान पे क्या इंपैक्ट पड़ेगा, वेरी इंपॉर्टेंटली आप जैसे लोग जिन्होंने ये मुमकिन किया है, जिन्होंने ये किया है, पाकिस्तानी डायस्पोरा, उसके लिए इसका क्या मतलब है। एरिक बोलेंगे अंग्रेजी में, मैं उर्दू में तर्जुमा करूंगा। एरिक, वेलकम बैक। You're muted, buddy.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me.
All right, I know you've been traveling. Let's get you in the center of your camera if we can, potentially. I know there you go. Thanks for being front and center. Okay, Eric Sperling, you are the executive director of Just Foreign Policy, which has taken a pivotal role in ensuring the passage of this. You helped your friends out with First Park Global on this. You've got some new friends in Park. Well done. We've covered that bit, but I have a classic 3-act Shakespearean tragedy set of questions for you. 1, what does this mean for Pakistan's generals, the military-run establishment? The resolution has happened, but the Pakistanis seem to be in denial. The Foreign Office is saying, oh, the Americans don't know much about Pakistan's political nuances. The foreign minister has, in fact, spoken in parliament today, Ishaq Dar, who happens to be conveniently a relative of the prime minister, and has said that, oh, we're going to have our own resolution to counter this resolution. And then the same old whatabouters have said that, oh, this was a Zionist conspiracy. These same congressmen, they support Israel, they want genocide in Palestine, and they are targeting Pakistan as well. So the pushback from the Pakistanis, as sordid and as sorry as, frankly, it seems to be, has started. But what does this really mean in real, practical, political terms? That's my first question for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's a great question. And I think the key thing that this signifies is that the effort to essentially paint over, and kind of gloss over what took place at the election and present it as just, yes, a problematic election, but very typical of Pakistani elections, that effort has failed. And I think that's what this means. The effort to kind of, as we heard, I think some of the Pakistani officials say they don't understand the nuances of Pakistani politics. And I understand, that perspective, that they're trying to share, but that in the U.S., nobody from the progressives, from the conservatives, from the younger, newer members to the more establishment or senior leadership members, nobody is buying that line, unfortunately. And so I think, the Pakistani establishment will have to accept that they're not going to be able to paint this election as legitimate, and that they're going to need to shift approaches when it comes to how they're going to move forward, rather than just simply, hoping that, that essentially this is going to kind of be forgotten. The passage of this bill by this margin means that that's not going to happen. And until there is some democratic process that restores legitimacy, this is going to be the understanding that is the overwhelming consensus of people in U.S. Congress.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to try to do my best to paraphrase that in Urdu. Bear with me. So Eric, जिनका एक बहुत अहम किरदार था इस रेजोल्यूशन को पास करवाने में, इनका जो एडवोकेसी ग्रुप है उसने एडवाइस किया था, जो दीगर और एडवोकेसी ग्रुप्स हैं, पाकिस्तानी डायस्पोरास के जो ग्रुप्स हैं उनको एडवाइस किया था. उन्होंने कहा कि जो कोशिश थी कि भाई ये इलेक्शन हो गया है, करवा दिया है, आगे चलो, मिट्टी पाओ, गल मुकाओ, वो नहीं हो सकता, क्योंकि चीज अब रिकॉर्ड पे आ गई है कि इलेक्शंस में धांधली हुई है, मसले थे. और अमेरिका में एरिक ने जो अल्फाज इस्तेमाल किए कि नोबडी इज बाइंग इट, कि कोई ये जो आर्ग्यूमेंट है कोई खरीद नहीं रहा, कोई बिलीव नहीं कर रहा, इनका बयान या बिलीव नहीं कर रहा कि इलेक्शन हो गए, आगे चलें. आगे चलने का वक्त नहीं है. लेजिटिमेसी जो इलेक्शंस की है वो अंडर क्वेश्चन है, और उस पे अब वो चीज रिकॉर्ड पे आ गई है. ये था मेरा इनके लिए पहला सवाल. Eric, my second question really stems from this neck of the woods. Now, we've seen a difference between the way the administration has acted, which is that the U.S. administration has turned the other way while all of this has been happening. Pakistan has been deteriorating human rights-wise, democracy-wise. And then on the other hand, the legislature seems to be turning gears, seems to be shifting gears. It's really revving. Look at Ro Khanna, someone who you worked with, who's now frankly become the new face of the Pakistani activism, pro-democracy activism rather, from Pakistan, or Pakistan-centric, which is on the ground here. The question is, there are people who are beginning to weigh in that this could lead to other things. The Pakistanis are saying, oh, this is non-binding, which it is, frankly. The naysayers are right. But could this really go into sanction mode? Could our common friend, Murtaza Hussain of The Intercept, he tweeted about the Magnitsky sanctions. He said this is a trajectory towards the Magnitsky sanctions, which frankly allow the U.S. government or the U.S. legislative branch to tighten the noose around specific military officers. Murtaza has named the army chief as one of those potential officers because he's frankly the one in charge. Ro Khanna has actually named the army chief just last week, specifically. I haven't seen this happen in a couple of years. U.S. congressman citing the army chief as a potential target of sanctions. And now this. So are there going to be sanctions?
Well, that remains to be seen. I mean, I think it's unclear exactly how long this situation is going to persist with this lack of legitimacy. From what we can tell, from what all the polling shows, is a lack of legitimacy in the eyes of the Pakistani people. And as we've seen, people in Congress do not, even members of Congress. And again, as I think even the Pakistani authorities have noted, that these are not radical, anti-imperialist members of Congress. These are pretty moderate, extremely moderate and conservative members of Congress who, let's say, even support Israel, but they can't even find a way to justify and to defend this election process, even if they want to. And many of them would want to, because they see this military establishment as working in their interest. But it just was such a poor performance, such a brazenly stolen election, that even they can't find a way to do that. So I do think if the situation persists, it's extremely likely that the situation is going to continue to escalate congressionally. This is just the very first kind of steps here. Like the passage of this resolution is really the culmination of just that initial response from not the more freshman or more progressive members, but from the leadership in Congress. So that's just the culmination of that first leadership effort. And so now coming out of this, you're going to be seeing multiple efforts, more efforts pushing and advancing. And as those other efforts advance, leadership is going to have to find their response as well. And one of the things that they often go to first, and it's going to be very hard for them to not explain why something like Magnitsky sanctions wouldn't apply here. So it's definitely a possibility of something that could be happening in the near future.
Right. Eric Sperling कहते हैं कि basically मैंने जब पूछा कि sanctions लगेंगी आर्मी चीफ पे, आसिम मुनीर पे वगैरह पे, कोर कमांडर्स वगैरह पे लग सकती हैं, तो इन्होंने कहा कि अभी तो पार्टी बेसिकली कहा कि अभी तो पार्टी शुरू हुई, अभी शुरुआत है, ये पहला एक इनिशियल रिस्पांस है. अभी क्योंकि एक चीज अब रिकॉर्ड पे आ गई, अब सीनियर जो मेंबर्स हैं वो भी अब इसमें इन्वॉल्व होंगे, सीनियर मेंबर्स ऑफ कांग्रेस जो हैं वो भी इन्वॉल्व होंगे, और इवन वो लोग जो पाकिस्तान के साथी रहे हैं, जो अप्रिशिएट करते हैं कि फौज का बड़ा अहम किरदार है, फौज के दोस्त रहे हैं, इवन वो भी डिनाई नहीं कर सके, उन्होंने भी वोट डाला कि जो हुआ है वो ज्यादती हुई है. They couldn't deny what happened. Eric, this begs the larger question. First of all, why are you doing this? And besides, of course, your own efforts, I understand that this is what you do, this is what Just Foreign Policy does. How do you see this developing as a larger scheme for the Pakistani diaspora, people like PAC, the Pakistan Political Action Committee, people like First Park Global, even individual volunteers, even people who want to be a part of this movement now? What's your message for them? And frankly, what's driving you about this particular story? You got you got your options, man. Just Foreign Policy probably has its fair pick of a lot of messed up countries and democracies. Why Pakistan? Why are you guys really leading with this?
No, I'm so glad you asked that, because it's really important to clarify that we operate in a very different position from the Pakistani American groups, from Pakistanis themselves. We don't in any way want any influence over what's going on in Pakistan. Our sole mission, and as an organization, generally, but also as it applies to Pakistan, is to make sure that the U.S. policy is not causing harm that is impacting or diverting the course of Pakistan. We believe that the Pakistani people should be setting that course exclusively. And I think the evidence shows, as I think many of your viewers probably are aware, that there's a very high potential that U.S. policy has had a negative impact on Pakistan in a number of different ways. And so I think to the extent that we're involved, it's to try to ensure there is no further harm to Pakistan's democracy, to their own history. We're confident that Pakistanis can do that without U.S. help, without U.S. quote unquote help that's diverting, charting them in a particular course that's in the U.S. interest rather than in the Pakistani people's interest. So that's number one. On that, and of course we do work. I think the issue we're most known for, perhaps, we were founded to oppose the war in Iran, and the issue we're most known for is the war in Yemen, where we've been working for over 9 years now to end the U.S. involvement in that war. We have gotten close and not finished that. That's been a 9-year fight. We're obviously incredibly involved in Gaza work and the direct U.S. role in arming and even giving unprecedented military intelligence to Israel in their, arguably genocidal campaign. So those are just many other issues we're working on. And part of that is we've seen this playbook before. It's actually a playbook we've seen in other places. And I was just reading about just today, folks may not be aware, but in 2009, there was a very similar overthrow of a democratically elected leader that was sanctioned by a court in Honduras. And a leader came to power and the U.S. backed that leader. But then over time, what did happen is the movement of Hondurans and also activists working on Honduras in Congress gained so much power that eventually the U.S. had to abandon that approach. And then, things shift dramatically. And just yesterday, that leader was sentenced to 40 years in prison for drug trafficking. And so I think this is a really important lesson for the Pakistani essentially authorities, is that you might feel that the U.S. says, that they have your back now, but the situation can change, and it's really shocking and it's quite immoral, honestly, how quickly they will throw people under the bus. And so I think it's something that the Pakistani military authorities should be considering about whether that's a gamble they want to take and how things could change in just a few years.
That's sage advice for the Pakistani military leadership. They can be thrown under the bus, and it's happened before as well. But quickly, before I let you go, Eric, the classic knee-jerk Pakistani military establishment or military establishment supporter reaction has been about you, your friends, both in Congress as well as in advocacy groups you've supported, is that all you guys who've done this are Zionists, and that this is one great Jewish conspiracy against the great Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Now, I spy a Palestine flag right behind you, hidden behind, camouflage behind that plant over there. But I'm just curious. I'm not going to ask you about your politics. It's not my business nor my style. But what do you have to say to those people who are calling this one big Zionist conspiracy in and out of Congress? Of course, it's hogwash. But I really need you to go on the record to explain to the people of Pakistan, some of whom perhaps are gullible enough to believe that this is some great Jewish Zionist conspiracy. Tell us a little more about the process that went behind this, so that people understand how broad it was.
Well, yeah, in terms of, the HRES 901 in particular, again, like I said, this was sort of the congressional leadership effort. So there's kind of multiple tracks, both kind of the more progressive caucus and, forward-leaning efforts, such as, led by Greg Kassar, Susan Wild, Ro Khanna, the more bold and kind of, really thoughtful and, I would say the most assertive foreign policy voices. But then this is the congressional leadership effort. So the idea that this is, if those folks, if anything, they would favor the Pakistani establishment because they actually feel, like Jared Kushner recently said, that the Pakistani establishment is one of those that's most likely to be friendly to Israel. They name it in their short list of countries that could normalize with Israel alongside Saudi Arabia. Right. So if anything, obviously, I think this is probably clear to most people, but just in case happy to make clear that if there's a Zionist effect on this effort, it would be in support of the Zionists would be in support of the Pakistan military establishment. And they'd be most concerned with an independent voice such as Imran Khan, who people can see he would have been a very powerful voice in the Muslim world during this Gaza genocide. And that's definitely, something that it would not be preferred by people who are diehard supporters of Israel.
Eric Sperling, appreciate the input. Thank you, man. I know you've just flown in and are probably jet lagged with all the travel, but I really appreciate it. I'm going to try to summarize what you said for our audiences and then let you go. Eric ने important बात की, दो सवाल मैंने पूछे, एक तो ये क्यों कर रहे हैं और दूसरा कि ये जो यहूदी लॉबी Zionist लॉबी जो लोग करने लग गए हैं, PML नून वाले कहने लग गए हैं कि ये सब पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ, इस्लाम के खिलाफ ये बकवास है, ये एक साजिश है. उस पे एक तो एरिक ने कहा, एक्सप्लेन किया कि जो सीनियर लीडर्स हैं, इवन जो शायद प्रो इजराइल हैं, वो खुद जो हैं, अगर वो वाकई इतने प्रो इजराइल हैं, तो फिर पाकिस्तान के लिए और भी रीजन बनता था कि ना सपोर्ट करें. क्यों किया पाकिस्तानी अवाम को सपोर्ट? अगर वाकई आप प्रो इजराइल हैं, पाकिस्तानी अवाम को क्यों सपोर्ट किया? एक तो ये पॉइंट था. दूसरा बड़ी इंपॉर्टेंट बात की कि पाकिस्तानी फौज को पता होना चाहिए कि ये जो इनके हथकंडे हैं, जब ये अमेरिका इन्हें सपोर्ट करता है, तो वैसे ही सपोर्ट हटा भी लेता है जब वो देखता है कि अवाम इनके साथ नहीं है, जो रिसेंटली हॉन्डुरस में हुआ. और कल ही उधर का एक लीडर को 40 साल सजा हो गई. उसको भी अमेरिका एक जमाने में प्रॉप करता था. और जब वक्त आता है, जब लोग खड़े हो जाते हैं एक रेजिम के खिलाफ, तो अमेरिका उधर से पतली गली ले लेता है. और जब मैंने ये भी पूछा एरिक से, व्हाई आर यू डूइंग दिस, क्यों, तो उन्होंने कहा क्योंकि ये अमेरिका के लिए भी अच्छा है और पाकिस्तान की अवाम के लिए भी अच्छा है, इसलिए काम करते हैं. एरिक, thank you again, my friend. Any quick closing thoughts before we go about HR 901?
Yeah, I would just say that in terms of the Pakistani diaspora, I mean, I've worked with so many different communities that have been tried to impact, U.S. policy towards their home countries, and it's been an incredibly impressive effort. But you could tell the movement is still in the earliest stages of learning each step of this. It's a very confusing U.S. congressional process, and so they're only going to get more skilled and more advanced from here. So I think if folks have hopes that this is going to die down, and that's not going to be the case. In fact, the diaspora, the pro-democracy activists in the diaspora are only going to get better from here. And so if I were, in Pakistani establishment or state, their allies at state, I would prepare for a long and very exhausting fight here that I don't think that they'll eventually win, and they may want to take that into account sooner rather than later.
Eric Sperling, at Eric Sperling on Twitter, which is banned in Pakistan, by the way, but I'm sure people will still access and follow your thoughts there. And the Executive Director of Just Foreign Policy. Thanks for being with us, my friend. More power to you.